December 20th, 1860, shortly after Lincoln's election, South Carolina legislature voted unanimously to secede from the Union. February 1861, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, Texas, Florida also seceded from the Union, while Virginia, North Carolina, Tennessee, and Arkansas threatened to secede if any Northern aggression were used on the South. The Confederate States of America established a provisional government in Montgomery, Alabama. Although Southern Democrats were in control of both Congress and the Supreme Court, the South feared Northern aggression, both economically, and they also feared the anti-slavery abolitionist movement growing strong in the North. In March 1861, Virginia Colonel Robert E. Lee expressed in writing, "I see only that a fearful calamity is upon us. There is no sacrifice I am not ready to make for the preservation of the Union save that of honor. If a disruption takes place, I shall go back in sorrow to my people and shake the misery of my native state." Back in Washington, Lincoln staffed his cabinet with opposite-thinking moderates and radicals. This was seen as a sign of weakness, but one thing Lincoln made clear: secession was illegal. April 12th, Fort Sumter, Charleston, South Carolina. Confederate forces fired on arriving Northern naval forces sent by Lincoln. The Civil War had begun. In a quick address, Lincoln said, "If I could save the Union without freeing any slaves, I would do it. And if I could save it by freeing all the slaves, I would do it." The population of the North was 20 million versus the population of the South, which was 9 million. 3 million were in bondage as slaves. The North had 7 times more manufacturing than the South. In the North, a central government laid the law. In the South, under the Confederacy, each state did as they pleased. President Jefferson Davis of the Confederacy was ill-prepared and not a military strategist. Manassas Junction, July 21st, 1861. A quick battle between the North and the South gave the North a quick victory. The Southern command was led by Thomas J. Jackson, who would later coin the name Stonewall Jackson. Lincoln put together a master plan: A, to blockade Southern forts by total control of the area surrounding the Mississippi; B, an invasion of the state of Virginia by an army of 500,000. C, Lincoln appointed 34-year-old General George B. McClellan, a veteran of the Mexican War. He appointed this man as a leader in strategic warfare. Robert E. Lee set up all his strategic plans from the town of Vicksburg, Mississippi. And the next point from there on was Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. The South had lost 1,500 men on July 4th, when General Grant had captured the town of Vicksburg, Mississippi. In Vicksburg, Mississippi, General Grant had surrounded the town with Union forces, cutting any contact with the east or west. Union troops were even navigating up and down the Mississippi River. On May 18, 1863, Grant marched Union troops into the town and battled with the Confederates. And after 7 weeks, the South saw itself isolated and absolutely closed, receiving no aid from the outside. On July 4th, the Confederate rebel defense handed the city of Vicksburg over to General Grant. On July 4th, 1863, Gettysburg fell into the hands of Grant. In early April 1865, Lincoln gave a speech on post-war reconstruction, recommending fairness and leniency, reconciliation, all aims at bringing the South back into the Union. Robert E. Lee surrendered to Ulysses S. Grant on April 9, 1865 at Appomattox Courthouse. On April 14th, Lincoln attended a play at Ford Theater when a certain man by the name of John Wilkes Booth, a die-hard Confederate and a sympathizer with the South, a pro-slavery fanatic. John Wilkes Booth had snuck into the president's booth and had shot Lincoln in the head. Abraham Lincoln died the next morning, surrounded by a large multitude of people. In 1865, the 13th Amendment to the Constitution abolishes slavery. 1866, Tennessee voters ratified a new state constitution, and the state is readmitted into the Union. 1866, the 14th Amendment grants citizenship to blacks. President Johnson issued amnesty to all parties in the rebellion. Arkansas, North Carolina, South Carolina, Alabama, Louisiana, Florida, all are readmitted into the Union. 1870, 15th Amendment granted suffrage, the right to vote, to black men. 1870, Virginia, Georgia, and Texas are readmitted into the Union. 1872, the Amnesty Act restores citizenship to Southerners, except for 500 Confederate leaders. 1877, the last federal troops patrolling the South are withdrawn from Louisiana and South Carolina. The policy of Reconstruction is officially and effectively terminated. During Reconstruction, President Andrew Johnson and the Radicals, Republicans in Congress, had passed civil rights laws to help the newly freed blacks in the South. These were ex-slaves. President Andrew Johnson and the radical Republicans did not trust white Southerners to grant blacks equality. One way to achieve equality was to amend the Constitution. The 13th, 14th Amendment, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment were passed to bring blacks into full citizenship and legally abolishes slavery. And all the aims of the federal Reconstruction was to A, bring the South back into the Union, to legally guarantee the newly freed blacks political and civil rights, C, to bolster the Southern economy, destroyed and devastated by the Civil War. Radical Republicans set up Reconstructionist governments in the South. These appointed governments were made up of radical Republicans, black Republicans, and other northern politicians and businessmen known as carpetbaggers. Collectively, all made an effort at pushing Reconstructionist policies. From 1869 to 1877, President Ulysses S. Grant was unable to cope with an emerging and changing America, a new wave of immigration, a rapid growth in industrialization and corruption in government, thievery and bribery. And Native Americans only saw the government driving them more and more into reservations. The election of 1876, the centennial anniversary of the U.S. independence, of Republican Rutherford B. Hayes, was a very close call. Negotiations rendered Hayes the victory over Democrat Samuel J. Tilden on account of one electoral vote by Hayes agreeing with the Southerners and with the Southern electoral machine to remove Reconstructionist troops from the South. In 1877, the last federal troops patrolling the South were removed from Louisiana and South Carolina. Reconstruction in the South was over. The idea of making African Americans full participants in the system and securing civil rights for African Americans would vanish until the middle of the 20th century.